were hurt, and they're on their way to area hospitals. At this time, the other commotion that's going on at the scene is related to the parking garage. Someone said they heard something in the garage, and because we have active law enforcement, all agencies on deck, we are going to make sure that there is nothing else going on. But at this time, there is nothing confirmed, no other shootings, no other active threats, but we are making sure that all the passengers who are leaving or coming to our airport are safe.
You said somebody, an eyewitness, believed they heard something. What was it they believed? Was it gunshots?
They thought that they heard gunshots, and we are, out of an abundance of caution, making sure that that is not the case.
And do you believe at this hour that there could potentially be another shooter out there?
At this time, I have not received confirmation from the ground of that, and so we are just trying to make sure that passengers do not panic and that they understand that they are being evacuated in an orderly fashion according to our emergency plans and our emergency operations.
And what's the status of the Fort Lauderdale Airport at this hour?
Right now, at this time, what we have done, because there was passengers in all terminals in the airport when this had occurred, we have moved the passengers to safe areas, and the ones that can get on the planes and be boarded and get moving to their other destinations, we are doing that. It's going to take us several hours to clear out the airport and move those flights along. Once we have cleared those flights and we have made sure that all the passengers who were in the terminals are cleared from the airport, then we will re-sweep the airport, and then the airport will reopen once the sweep is done.
How long do you think this sweep will be? Should passengers who have flights tomorrow expect not to fly, be able to fly in or out of this airport?
Our public information office is going to release information about the delays and and passengers who have flights scheduled for tomorrow will need to contact the airlines that those flights are going to be scheduled on for further information about delays. But at this point in time, we expect that we'll reopen the airport after our final sweep. It's going to take us several hours to clear the airport. So I'm going to say that probably by late evening, we should have further information about that.
Mayor, given that this is not a typical day, I'm curious, on a typical day at this airport, how many law enforcement officers are usually in this airport?
I do not have that information. That is something that you can...
I apologize, Mayor. Go ahead.
I said I do not have that information at this time, but I do know, however, that there are several law enforcement agents as well as Broward Sheriff's officers in every terminal and in every area of this airport that requires security, in addition to the TSA as well as Broward County Airport staff and security.
Have more officers, have more officers in the vicinity been called in from outside counties to come and help secure this airport?
We have had officers called in from all law enforcement agents that are available around, and all agencies that need to be involved are there.
Okay. I'm curious if you know anything further about the shooter.
At this time, the shooter is in custody. It is a male. They will not release his identity at this time. They are doing further investigation to see if there is other information that they can gain, but they are not releasing his information at this time. But it is a male shooter, and based on the information that has come out as of this investigation, he has acted alone, and they are confident in that.
Senator Bill Nelson of Florida is reporting that the shooter is Esteban Santiago. He had military ID on him, and he was born in New Jersey. Can you confirm that?
I cannot confirm that.
Do you know if he was a resident of the area?
I cannot confirm that.
Okay. And what right now will be your focus, Senator Sharif, over the next, Mayor Sharif, over the next few hours? Mayor, what will you be focusing on?
Our focus right now is to safely move the passengers that are at the airport to their destinations, to get them on the planes that are already there at the airport and other terminals, and to clear Terminal 2 and to make sure that those passengers that were deplaning and that are leaving the airport are leaving safely. We are going to, like I said, our focus is on sweeping the airport. Every area of the airport has law enforcement personnel in it. We are clearing those areas as quickly as possible, and at this point in time, airport staff and law enforcement are confident that there's no other shooting going on at this time.
And Mayor, if people have family members who are at this airport, cannot reach them, is there a way, a contact number? How can they possibly be in touch to make sure their loved ones are okay?
I would say at this point in time, because there is a lot going on, the best way to get the information is we're going to be releasing it over the next period of hours. We will be updating everyone. And the cell phone, as far as I'm aware of, is still working in that area. So if they can contact them on cell, if they can't, just watch the TV and we will update. We are giving updates as quickly as possible.
Okay. Broward County Mayor Barbara Sharif, thank you so much for joining us, Mayor Sharif. We appreciate this update. We've continuing to follow the coverage here at Fort Lauderdale Airport. A second incident of some sort has caused a great deal of concern. The entire airport is now being evacuated. Mayor Sharif of Broward County telling CBS News right now it's going to take several hours now for them to completely evacuate this entire airport, remove all passengers, and then go inch by inch to make sure this entire compound is secure. There was some concern that there was an issue at a parking garage. The mayor confirming to CBS News that a witness on the ground believed that they heard some sort of gunshots, phoned it into law enforcement. That is what has caused this great deal of concern, and law enforcement authorities to come and examine this parking lot and evacuate the entire airport. We believe now 5 people confirmed dead, 13 taken to the hospital, according to the mayor. Facebook has now launched a safety check for folks who might have been at this airport to let their loved ones know. The mayor saying they're starting their own services they're looking into over the next couple of hours, to stay tuned to that as well. But of course, check with airport, your local airline carrier, as to whether the airport will even be up and running and flights will be out by tomorrow coming in and out of this airport. Again, continuing to monitor this situation as it unfolds. I want to take you now to our station there on the ground at Fort Lauderdale, WFOR.
We've also seen a lot of airplanes on the ground. Many of those planes are filled with passengers who are not going anywhere. We've been getting some information from various sources that tell us about some of the flights, whether they have landed or whether they have been diverted. Some flights have been diverted to Orlando. We're told about a flight a Spirit flight that was diverted, 523 from Newark to Fort Lauderdale, has been instead sent to Orlando. Another Spirit flight from Cleveland to Fort Lauderdale has been diverted to West Palm Beach. Another one from Atlantic City has been diverted to Fort Myers, Florida. So if you are expecting or were expecting to go to the airport today to pick up a loved one who was flying in from out of town and arriving at Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, there is a very good possibility that that flight has been diverted someplace else, and you should check in with the various carriers to find out the latest information on where your loved one or friend's flight might be landing, because it's not landing in Fort Lauderdale.
And just a quick note here, Broward Sheriff's also tweeting out, please don't tie up 911. Apparently people are calling in 911 to try to get information, and they are clogging up the phone lines. It's very important that you don't do that, because they need to be open for this active situation. They say the 911 dispatch does not have any information. Just keep watching media reports, maybe go on social media, but please don't call into 911 looking for information. We are trying to get as much information as we can, and we're bringing that to you as soon as we get it. We have Joan Murray in, who said she was actually one of the people inside the airport. She was there trying to talk to witnesses when officials and people started kind of getting chaotic and told her to get on the ground, and that she actually had to get on the ground. She was among those people inside during that possible second incident, or that possible wave of panic. So we are still trying to figure that out. But again, TSA did tweet out that there was an active shooter, and this was just 34 minutes ago now, which would have been much later than the first shooting incident. So there you see people walking out again on the ground.
And we have been told that the shooter, who is in custody once again, is Esteban Santiago, who has a military ID and who was born in New Jersey. That coming to us from law enforcement sources, talking to CBS News. Senator Bill Nelson of Florida also sharing that same information with the cable news network just a short time ago. We were talking to our transportation correspondent, our colleague from CBS News, Chris Van Cleve, within the last hour or so, who told us that as of that moment when we spoke with him, that there was no indication, according to his sources, of any terror event. Of course, that's the big question on everybody's mind, because we have seen airports targeted in the past. We have seen airports here in the United States being targeted, and most recently in Europe, in Brussels, and elsewhere, because of the nature of airports. There are particular parts of airports where security is tight, and then there are other parts of airports where security is not so tight, what experts refer to as soft targets. And this initial shooting, where multiple people were killed, we are told took place at the baggage claim area of Terminal 2, the Delta baggage claim area of Terminal 2. And if you're on social media, perhaps you've seen the pictures that we have as well, which we will not be broadcasting because of the graphic nature of them, of various people who had been, some of them it looked mortally wounded and lying on the ground being attended to by other passengers or loved ones or family members there. Just a terrible, terrible scene, and you could see people lying there, obviously very severely wounded as a result of this shooting, again, at the hands of a man who's been identified to us as Esteban Santiago, with a military ID, born in New Jersey. And we keep repeating that information only because we don't really have anything else to go on right now. But obviously this is the early stages of this situation, and we're going to be learning a lot more as the day goes on.
We also know that Port Everglades closed to all traffic now because of this developing situation at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. You definitely want to see, you can see the live pictures there from Chopper 4. You definitely want to stay away from this area if you can. We do know that Miami International Airport is operating. All flights are open, and they are operating as usual. So, of course, a lot of these flights going to be diverted, canceled, delayed. If you have a flight, I would just definitely urge you to check with your airlines before you go. If you're expecting passengers, probably no one going to be out of there anytime soon. Now, look, you see live pictures of law enforcement running under that parking garage with look like look like guns. They were holding guns and running under there. They've just been hidden from view from our chopper because they're under that garage. But they're definitely, I saw, I think, about half a dozen of them running. It looked like they had some urgency, and they did have their guns drawn. And we're looking at a scene here on the overpass, so you see how heavy this law enforcement presence is. All hands on deck as the situation remains very active. People still trying to figure out whether there was a second shooting there or some sort of second gunfire or explosion. People just trying to figure out what was going on. Such a chaotic scene.
Well, conflicting reports, Ruta Bay, and for those of us in the news media, it's very frustrating because obviously we don't want to pass anything along that isn't 100% correct. But we're hearing from two different two different law enforcement organizations, one the TSA and the other Broward Sheriffs, that there is either an active shooter situation that's ongoing or an active search for a potential shooter. So we're getting some conflicting information, whether it's actually taking place or whether they're just investigating reports that perhaps there was a secondary shooting situation. But right now we have not been able to confirm any of that except for the initial shooting that took place at around 12:50 this afternoon. That's when the call came in to BSO. Chopper 4 is searching around looking for something good that would shed some light on the situation. That's why the camera is moving. And this is a situation that has impacted so many different parts of the airport. Take a look at that scene. So this is an area where you would not normally see a cluster of people like that. This is where some of the private jets, some of the corporate jets land and take off from at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. It is in a remote part of the airport, far away from the commercial jets, but you see people clustered there as well. And this was something that was very, very distressing for anyone who might have been joining us live and watching this as it unfolded about 45 minutes or so ago. We were watching what looked as though to be an orderly.
We've been listening to anchor Rick Fulbaum from station WFOR reporting there from Fort Lauderdale. I want to take you to our network coverage. My colleague Josh Elliott is speaking to transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve. Let's listen in.
Screenings before making their way onto airplanes, even as we have seen in a post 9/11 world, the exponential increase in levels of security at departure terminals at airports around the globe. It has not been as profound, again, in these baggage claim areas, such as the one where the initial attack took place today.
Yeah, and that's perhaps something that needs to get reevaluated now. But, you know, can you realistically screen everyone coming in to a baggage area? You know, is that something that the public would even sort of put up with? These are questions that you have to factor in. I mean, and then who's going to do it? Are you going to ask the TSA to do it? If so, where is that staffing and that manpower going to come from? Where's the equipment going to come from? If you're going to have local police do it, same question. So there are a lot of challenges with how do you secure public spaces. But we could be having this conversation about people going into a stadium, right? You know, you might go through security. I was at the Rose Bowl football game. I went through a metal detector to get into the stadium. But before I went through the metal detector, I was in a long line of people waiting to get screened. Well, that's a soft target. And where do you start the security lines? Whether it's at an airport or any public gathering point. And, there's not a perfect solution. You can't just build a bubble that creates okay, everyone is safe now sort of situation. It is the inherent danger in the open society we live in.
And again, the security forces at the major airports across this country do differ from city to city. What do we know? Again, as we heard from Senator Bill Nelson, briefed by the head of the TSA, who said that, again, Esteban Santiago, the suspect ID'd by authorities, later taken into custody in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2, said to have, with a weapon, unloaded 3 magazines, killing 5, injuring 8 others before then taking a seat and allowing authorities to apprehend him. What do we know about the security force there at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Airport? And what do you make of the quick response time, all things considered here?
Sure. So you have Broward County Sheriff's officers that are, deputies I should say, that are stationed at the airport. They are the uniformed police presence at that airport. And I flew through there a couple of times this year. Every time I was there, you saw a noticeable patrol presence. Sometimes the officers had long guns, sometimes they had canines, and that's in addition to the TSA. So you had a detachment of police, first responders, already at the airport. When the reports of the shots being fired came in, they would have been the first ones there. We're talking, within seconds, if not a minute or two onto the scene there, because there were already officers in Terminal 2. From there, you would see the rest of the sheriff's deputies stationed at that airport would likely converge on that scene. From there, you're going to bring in police from surrounding jurisdictions as well as the sheriff's office. We know that federal authorities, the FBI and the ATF, are also on scene. So, you have a lot of police in the Fort Lauderdale area. That is a big metropolitan area, so you can get a lot of responders there very quickly. But the initial security footprint, you have uniformed police in that airport. They are sheriff's deputies. You also have the TSA officers, but they are unarmed and they are manning the checkpoints. So they are not necessarily first responders the way the police are.
Okay, Chris Van Cleve, please do stand by there in Washington as, for those joining us, you are watching a CBS News special report, a scene of continuing and unfolding chaos at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, where just before 1 p.m. Eastern Time today, just over 2 hours ago, a man entered the baggage claim area of Terminal 2 of the airport. A suspect later taken into custody and identified as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, who some reports suggest was wearing some sort of uniform and was bearing a military ID. He is said, according to Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, who has been briefed by the TSA, to have used a weapon to unload 3 magazines. In the shooting, he would kill 5, 8 others would be injured. He was later said to have, after sitting down, he was taken into custody, but then we saw a scene of chaos unfold anew as it looked as though authorities had things under control. Passengers looked to be entering the terminals who had been stranded out on the tarmac. A parking garage between 2 terminals saw a sudden and profound influx of law enforcement personnel, heavily armed, as they made their way with reports of an active shooter and shots possibly fired on airport grounds. We do want to show you, though, some video of the scene just moments after the shooting is said to have occurred. This, again, in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at the Fort Lauderdale Airport. It is the home to both Air Canada and Delta. If you listen there, you can hear screams in the background, victims being attended to, which we have blurred. And then this was also a still image provided to us from, again, just outside Terminal 2. This is just outside a door from which you would exit the baggage claim area and push up against that chain link fence. On the other side of that chain link fence is, in fact, the tarmac. And as you can see there, it would appear that there is a victim with quite significant loss of blood, perhaps being attended to by one person, as again we saw a police officer leaving that scene. And so this is now the scene that we are seeing on the tarmac. We can tell you that hundreds do remain on the tarmac at the airport at current. Scores more were being escorted around the airport's northern perimeter in a sign of our times, all with their hands raised. This is, again, what it looks like outside the terminals there at the airport. And as we did, again, mention, the Broward Sheriff's Office did confirm an active search was underway. It began just over 1/2 hour ago as unconfirmed reports were made of more shots fired on airport grounds. That could be attributed to any number of things, as it is obviously a very fluid situation here. Again, Chris Van Cleve joining us from Washington, our transportation correspondent. As we do see these scenes of what's happening on the tarmac and outside the airport proper here, Chris, what exactly do we know about what's happening inside that airport at this time?
Well, we know that tensions are running high, that there are police, sheriffs, federal authorities that are working on clearing this airport. I mean, what you're going to have to do now, particularly after this round of unconfirmed reports of shots being fired, is clear every parking garage, clear every terminal, going parking space by parking space, floor by floor, until you've determined that there is no more danger. And that's going to take time. And so what you want to do, if you're the police, secure everyone, get them sheltered in a safe place, and then just slow the operation down. Time is on your side at that point, and go through and see what you can find or see what you can clear up. We at this point are waiting for a sheriff's briefing that hopefully brings us some more information as to what the situation is there, if we're getting close to feeling like we can rule out a second shooting, or if in fact there were 2 shootings at this airport. What this incident has done is sparked an increase in security at airports across the country now. We have heard from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey that is increasing security at the New York area airports. That will include increased random bag checks, increase of heavily armed tactical officers, as well as uniformed police and canine units. LAX is increasing police presence at the Los Angeles airport. We're seeing a similar situation at Miami's airport as well. So right now, you're going to see a very tense but methodic search going on inside the airport, inside all the buildings, inside all the parking garages, to make sure that there is not a continued hostile presence at the airport. This, as another team of investigators are going to be working to learn as much as they can about the suspected shooter here. We know that there was a military ID involved with this shooter, so they're going to be looking at his military status. They're going to be looking at where he lives, where he's from, where he's been, who he knows, who he's been talking to, as they try to figure out what prompted this shooting, what prompted the suspect to end up in the situation that we're talking about now.
In that shooter, a suspect identified and taken into custody, 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, we do know, born in New Jersey, again, taken into custody in possession of a military ID. Reports do suggest perhaps he was wearing a uniform, a dark uniform of some sort. That cannot, however, be confirmed. And Chris, as we do see, again, scenes of just outside the terminal, we see police there, heavily armed, of course, you wearing all manner of bulletproof clothing. We also saw Broward Sheriff's Office officers. We saw FBI personnel as there. What level of coordination, even in these moments, just following what we've seen happen here at the airport, what level of coordination is it that we're talking about?
Well, you've got a high level of coordination. You know, the FBI, the Sheriff's Office, the ATF, the other law enforcement agencies are talking to each other. You're coordinating that, hopefully from the same command post. What can happen in a situation like this is you now have numerous tactical teams. You have numerous officers from all over the region, and they're trying to search this area. Some of them are going to have card keys and things to be able to easily get into places. Others, it's going to be a little bit more involved, and that can create a lot of noise. So some of what may have led to these reports of possible additional gunshots could just be the process of searching and clearing, and the banging and the slamming that may go into kicking in some doors and that kind of thing. So, you know, the more people you have, the more chaotic it can be. But there is a lot of coordination. And Josh, I know we're waiting for a briefing here from police.
And it certainly appears as though that briefing is about to begin here momentarily. Chris Van Cleve in Washington, stand by. Let's join again the briefing currently underway.
Of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Shortly before 1 p.m. today, we had an active shooter inside Terminal 2, the lower level by baggage. The active shooter shot at least 13 people. 8 people, as I know right now, are in area hospitals being treated. I don't know the degree of their injuries. 5 people have succumbed to their wounds and tragically are dead. We are not releasing any information on any of the victims until we identify them, which is going to take some time, and we are able to respectfully notify the next of kin first. The investigation continues. We have area SWAT teams and the Broward Sheriff's Office SWAT team clearing the entire airport. There'll be no movement in or about the airport until our SWAT teams give me real-time information that it's safe. Right now we're taking, this scene is considered fluid and active. We won't be, well, we have, one of the more critical pieces of information is we have the shooter in custody. He's unharmed. No law enforcement fired any shots. The subject is being interviewed by a team of FBI agents and Broward Sheriff's Office homicide detectives. There's been incredible cohesiveness and cooperation between the Broward Sheriff's Office, the FBI, FDLE, and all the local law enforcement entities. We'll answer your questions at the end. We'll answer your questions at the end. At this point, I'm going to put the director of the airport on to tell you about what's going on at the airport. Then you'll be hearing from the SAC, Mr. Pirro. Then I'll come back to answer questions.
Thank you, Sheriff. As the Sheriff said, my name is Mark Gale. I'm the airport director here at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. When the incident occurred, we responded. Many of you know that we've suspended operations at the airport for the time being. We're working together with all the law enforcement to address all the needs and concerns of the passengers that are inside the building and on airplanes right now. They are all sheltered in place. We're not sure exactly when the airport will reopen for operations. We're going to work together with all the law enforcement that's here, our airlines, and all the other agencies before we actually move to reopen up the airport. But in the meantime, as the Sheriff has indicated, we're just going to go step by step, methodically through the building before we take any steps to reopen operations. We'll keep everybody informed as best we can through social media and our airport website as to when that may occur. And we'll also be setting up a hotline for families or friends that may be looking for folks that they haven't been able to reach in contact with, and we'll also publish that in the relatively near future, again on our HOP site and out through a website and through social media. That's all I have for now.
Good afternoon. My name is George Pirro. I'm the special agent in charge of the FBI's Miami field office. As the Sheriff mentioned, the FBI is working very closely with the Broward Sheriff's Office, supporting their ongoing efforts here at the airport. We're working jointly doing all of the witness interviews as well as the suspect interview. The investigation is very early. We have a lot of preliminary information that we are going through, but at this point our role is to actively support the Broward Sheriff's Office until we make a determination on the nature and the motive of this incident. Thank you.
We've heard about a shooting in Terminal 1. What can you tell us about that? Just refer to the camera.
At this time, there's been no shooting at any place else but at the downstairs of Terminal 2. There's no confirmation of any shooting. As a matter of fact, at this point, as I speak, the only gunshots fired at any time during this horrific incident have been downstairs in Terminal 2.
What happened at Terminal 1? That everyone was evacuated and people said they heard shots upstairs.
It seems like somebody got injured evacuating, nothing to do with any type of gunshot or anything like that.
Our light truck operator heard shots after the initial lone shooter at the other terminal. He heard shots directly behind him inside the parking lot.
We've had no confirmation at that. We have law enforcement personnel, both federal, state, and local, throughout the airport. No law enforcement in this time has confirmed that there's been any gunshots other than was fired in Terminal 2.
We also saw someone being arrested. Is there another person possibly involved?
not in the shooting aspect of it. We're reviewing tapes. If someone was arrested, it might be for a plethora of things. But to my knowledge, no one was taken into custody. People could have been secured in handcuffs until we found out who they were, what they were, and how they were related or not related to this scenario. So I don't know if they were physically arrested or not, but there's been no correlation. Happened around the baggage area.
Any information as to why?
One suspect only in custody. We're not releasing any information on that suspect. Yes, sir.
Are you able to say what kind of weapon was used in the shooting
No.
in Terminal 2?
No.
Was it an automatic? Was it a semi-automatic?
We're not going to comment.
Was there a struggle while apprehending him?
No. When we apprehended him, the subject was arrested without incident.
Any motive?
I don't know.
Does it appear that the shooter was waiting for somebody to arrive and go to baggage and then ambushed them?
We're at the very beginning of the investigative stages. That's what this is all about. That's why at this point the lead on the investigation is with the Broward Sheriff's Office. If we do uncover at some time that this was related to any type of terrorist or terrorist activities, then the FBI will have complete incident command of this, and we'll be assisting the FBI as we move forward with the investigation. I want to say this is not the time for anybody to call 911 on this incident. We're all over here. If you have a real emergency, of course, but if it has involved you, please keep the 911 lines open. And if you need information, you could follow us on Twitter at Sheriff. At Broward Sheriff. Twitter at Broward Sheriff.
Sir, have you been able to identify any vehicle at the airport that might belong to the shooter?
Not at this time, not to my knowledge.
So at this point, there doesn't appear to be a terrorism indication at all, or too early?
No, it's too early to say either way on that. That's what's going on right now.
The baggage area where they were coming from, where were those people coming from? Where were they? Do you know? What flight were they there?
I do know what flight, but we're not releasing any information until we can positively identify the victims and in a respectful, dignified manner notify the next of kin. We won't be giving up. No.
Can you tell us if the victims were men, women, or children?
No, we're not going to release.
Do you think this guy acted alone?
At this point, it looks like he acted alone.
Were they part of a family?
Second active shooter within the last 30-45 minutes. Can you speak to that?
Yes, there's no at this point there's no second active shooter. There are no victims suffering for any gunshot wounds. We heard that information as well. It's not confirmed, and right now we're dealing with this incident right here.
Can you tell us what was going on in the parking garages that had the agents' guns drawn, looking for someone?
I'm sure they were looking for clearing parking lots. We have a variety of SWAT teams out and assets out clearing the entire airport to make sure it's safe. So just doing their job, working very hard and diligently.
Was the shooter Mr. Daly? I mean, it's Friday afternoon. I mean, about how busy was the airport? Is this the busiest it is during the week, given that it's Friday afternoon, sort of the height of tourist season?
The airport's always very busy. We're one of the fastest growing airports in the country. So again, the terminals are very full right now. Our passengers are sheltered in place. We'll be working with law enforcement to actually get them released systematically, as the sheriff has indicated, terminal by terminal, to make sure that folks are able to exit safely as they proceed with their clearing duties.
Do you have any idea how many people are secured either across the runways, in the terminal, on the plane? Any estimates to that number?
Right now, we actually have everybody in either at the terminals, or we've had some airplanes that have landed, that we still have airplanes with people on board that have landed that have not been brought into the terminal building. It's possible that those airplanes may actually depart and not actually come into the terminal building. But on any given day, we typically handle between 80 and 100,000 passengers coming through the facility.
So people who are on planes now may not be able to get off? Is that, I didn't hear well.
That's a possibility, that we're working with the airlines that some decisions may be made. That hasn't been confirmed yet, that they may actually depart for other cities. We're going to go through the terminals, again, very slowly and methodically to make sure everything is clear before we make any decisions about releasing additional passengers into the building on top of those that are already still in the facility.
How many were in that Terminal 2 when the shooting?
I don't have that information.
Do you know how many were in the baggage area?
I don't have that information. Typically in a baggage claim, there could be hundreds of people at any one time, but I don't know what the number was at that particular moment in time now.
And how many planes have landed and not allowed to disembark?
I don't have the number of those that are on the ground right now.
Where can passengers get that information? Are you going to put that on your website?
We're going to put information out through on our website and also on Twitter at FLL Flyer.
What happened to people on the runway? Sheriff Israel, can you give us a timeline? When, to your knowledge, do you know, did the shooting begin? How long was the shooter at large? Where was he inside the terminal? I mean, how extensive was the chase?
And where's he being interrogated?
As I said before, it happened just before 1 o'clock. We're not going to give out any specific information about the logistics.
But,
and as I said before, shortly thereafter, almost immediately after the shootings.
Who apprehended the shooter?
He was apprehended by a Broward Sheriff's deputy, and he was taken into custody without incident.
Sheriff, did the gunman check the weapon into his luggage on an Air Canada flight, and then fly here, land, take the weapon out, and go to the bathroom and load it?
As I said before, that's all part of an ongoing investigation.
So we also heard that he took his gun down after the shooting and laid on the floor. Can you talk about it?
I haven't gotten that far. All I know is the gunman is in custody. He's being interviewed by a team of FBI agents and Broward Sheriff's deputies. And at the time, once we establish motive and an investigation continues and we find out what that motive is, then myself and Mr. Pirro, the director SAC of the FBI, will make a decision as to who takes the lead on the continuing investigation.
Sheriff, did any of your deputies fire their weapons at this parking garage? Is that possibly what we heard? What did we hear?
I don't know what you heard, but there's no confirmation of any type of gunshot anywhere but at the time of this horrific incident.
Sheriff, can you say if the gunman was a airline passenger, or did he come in at the arrivals area?
I believe I know that information, but it's not something we're going to release at this time.
Can you say where he's being interrogated?
Where he is right now? I'm not sure where he's right now.
Sheriff Israel, if there was no other viable threat, a second threat, why would the airport be closed after the first person was arrested and being interrogated? Why shut down the airport?
As I said, we can't say there's no viable threat. We have to clear the airport. It's just a common sense approach. My concern right now, not only with the families of those who lost, but my concern is with the citizens of Broward County. And until myself and the director of the SAC of the FBI, until we believe that this airport is a safe place and people can move about, it won't be opened.
In Terminal 1, what?
Last question. At the airport at the time of the shooting?
Excuse me, Amy?
How many deputies at the airport at the time of the shooting?
I'm not sure. Thank you very much. Please follow us at Broward Sheriff on Twitter.
Can you just tell what caused the evacuation of Terminal 1? Again, it's where
I'm not sure.
Again, that was an update from authorities as to the status of the investigation into the attack just before 1 p.m. today at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. A shooter, there's a suspect identified as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago Ruiz, entered a baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at the airport that is home to Delta and Air Canada, and is said to have opened fire, killing at least 5, injuring 8 others. There are 8, again, as we just heard in that update from authorities, there are 8 now recovering at area hospitals. Their various conditions are unknown. In this fluid and active scene, it does remain. So as you can see, scenes of chaos have been playing out for the better part of 3 hours now. Hundreds still remain outside on the tarmac. And I want to bring back our Chris Van Cleve, transportation correspondent in Washington. And Chris, we now have a report from Chip LaMarca. He's a Broward County commissioner who has provided this information that the shooter, again, suspect identified as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago Ruiz, was a passenger on an Air Canada flight. He had a checked gun. It is said that he claimed his bag, removed the gun from his baggage, went into a bathroom to load it, and came out of that bathroom and opened fire. Again, 13 in total were shot, 5 were killed, 8 more injured, and are now said to be in various states of recovery at area hospitals. What more then can you tell us, Chris, about the information that we're just learning?
Well, we're still working to confirm that with Air Canada, but here are the rules. You can actually take a firearm in your checked bag. Now, there are some rules. The TSA requires that it be unloaded in a hard-sided, locked container, but you can travel with a handgun. So it is completely possible that that is how this played out, that he had checked the firearm, got his checked bag, loaded the weapon, and then started shooting. That would certainly be a new one as far as what we have seen in shootings at airports. Typically, we've seen people come in from the outside, not through the secured area, with the gun essentially on them in their checked bag. But you do have the right, as a flyer, you can check a handgun.
Chris Van Cleve in Washington, we do want to ask you to stay with us. Meanwhile, I do now want to welcome Florida Senator Bill Nelson. Senator, we very much appreciate your time. I do know that you have been in contact with authorities, including the head of the TSA, Administrator Peter Neffinger. What is it that you can tell us as it relates specifically to the state of the investigation right now?
Well, a lot of the information I got about an hour and a half ago from Admiral Neffinger, TSA, so you're more up to date and you've been covering it very well. I would point out that it is a soft, easy target where there are bunches of people, in this case, outside of baggage claim. We saw a similar situation last year at the Brussels airport, but instead it was outside of the checkpoint to go into the airport as well as the ticketing counter. And whenever you have these kind of targets, the best deterrent is the Viper team, the dog. And last year, late last year, we doubled the number of those Viper teams in the FAA bill. But it's just going to be hard to get enough dog teams for all of the crowds that we find in airports, and that's going to be a continuing problem.
Certainly one of the questions to answer in the aftermath here, Senator. As we just heard the update from authorities, I also want to ask you about some information provided to us by Broward County Commissioner Chip Lamarca, who is said that have been told that Esteban Santiago, the suspect identified and later arrested by authorities, was a passenger on an Air Canada flight traveling with a checked gun, and that he did have a concealed weapon permit, later said to have entered a bathroom, loaded the gun, and returning to the baggage claim area, and so opening fire. Can you tell us anything specifically as it regards that?
No, I do not have that information. I was given the information that he had a military ID identification, but whether or not that was his, whether it was an up-to-date one, or if it was someone else's, we don't know. But they've got him in custody, so we had the name. They'll be able to run that down quite quickly if he was military.
Again, we can confirm that Mr. Santiago was born in New Jersey, and again, as you mentioned, Senator, was taken into custody in possession of a military ID. It is a question, meanwhile, Senator, perhaps without an answer, a question that following incidents just this year in cities such as Istanbul and Brussels, where we have seen terrorist attacks play out at airports there, a question asked about departure areas in these terminals, and just how far out can one extend a perimeter while also ensuring the safety of the inevitable lines that will build at the security checkpoints. It now seems that a similar question must be asked about how to better secure baggage claim areas that have certainly seen far less stringent levels of security.
Wherever you have crowds, and at airports, you'll continue to have crowds. As long as there's inclement weather, people are going to have to be inside. And as a result, that's a soft target. Seaports, there's another one where you're going to have crowds getting on and off of a cruise ship. So it's the inevitable thing that we have to prepare for this kind of protection. And again, the dog teams are one. But let me give you another example. We're all too sensitive in Florida about crowds. A crowded nightclub, the Pulse nightclub, and you saw what carnage was wrecked there. Unfortunately, this is the era in which we live.
And that shooter in Orlando, of which you speak, did invoke the Islamic State in speaking with authorities. as in fact he was committing that crime, and certainly as it speaks to the time in which we live. Senator, in speaking with authorities today, including Admiral Neffenger, do we know if any sort of similar invocation or responsibility has been seen here?
I asked that question, and at that moment, we don't have a motive. I might say that since you mentioned the Pulse nightclub, that it's interesting that just today I filed the bill that I'd filed in the last Congress. In this case, had it been law, Mateen, the shooter, was on an investigative terrorist list. Prior to the shooting, had been taken off. If we merely had a mechanism by which once he buys a high-caliber weapon, the FBI has to notify in the case that he had been on a terrorist watch list, that very likely could have caught Mateen, the shooter in the Orlando Pulse nightclub.
Certainly things to litigate as it regards what did happen in Orlando, but as it regards what we've seen here, and if the information, again, provided to us by a Broward County commissioner is in fact correct, that a passenger on an Air Canada flight had been traveling with a checked gun, which he was able to remove from baggage and load, what might it say about the future of being allowed to travel with weapons regardless of license to do so?
Well, it would indicate just another way of concealing a weapon to get into the area. However, in a baggage claim area where people are bunched up, you don't go through security to go there to pick up your bags. And so he could have just as well walked up from the outside with such a weapon instead of having to have it in checked baggage.
Do you believe, though, as again we look at the initial aftermath and work to confirm the reports of the information that perhaps the suspect identified and later apprehended by authorities who said to have committed this attack was in fact an Air Canada passenger with a license to carry a concealed weapon that had been checked in his luggage, stowed on the plane, and retrieved from baggage claim? Should passengers be allowed to fly with weapons on planes in any way?
Well, what about hunters, for example? They check their weapons. Now, in that case, it's not handguns, but it's shotguns and rifles. So as a practical matter, to say you can't fly with a weapon being checked away and checked as a weapon, I don't think that's practical that you're going to ban those. Again,
many questions to be answered on that front. Meanwhile, as you have been speaking with authorities throughout the afternoon, Senator, what can you tell us about the level of coordination between the various agencies here?
I can tell you the FBI was there right away. They are more than likely heading this investigation until they know the motive. And, of course, through all of your visuals that you're showing, you can see all of the various arms at all levels of law enforcement that are there.
And as we do thank you for your time, Senator, I wonder what message you do have, not just for your constituents, but for all watching these scenes of chaos and the aftermath in Fort Lauderdale play out.
Whether this fellow is a terrorist or mentally imbalanced or has some other motive, we have to be able to go on and live our lives without being intimidated and threatened. That's what terrorists like to do. They try to throw us off our game, and America must move forward.
Florida Senator Bill Nelson, very much appreciate your time and insight this afternoon, Senator. Again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
Again, as we now bring back our Chris Van Cleve in Washington, as we take these live looks at the scene still unfolding at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Hundreds do remain outside on the various tarmacs surrounding the terminals following the shooting just under 3 hours ago in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2, home to Delta and Air Canada. Shooting, again, committed by a suspect who has been taken into custody unharmed. We should add 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, born in New Jersey, said to have been taken into custody bearing a form of military identification and unloading what we're told were 3 magazines worth of ammunition. He did kill at least five, and injure at least 8. Those 8 are in various states of recovery at area hospitals. And as we do then bring in our Chris Van Cleve. Chris, again, as we've learned from a Broward County Commissioner, Chip LaMarca, the update and information that he has provided, we are working to confirm. The shooter, a passenger on an Air Canada flight who had a checked gun in his baggage. He claimed his bag, made his way to a bathroom, is said to have loaded the gun inside that bathroom and returned to the baggage claim area and so opened fire. I know, again, you have made it clear that you can have a weapon in checked luggage. It is allowed, but certainly this will be a new debate to be had.
It will likely cause TSA to look at these rules and, perhaps putting some restrictions. But the rules as they are right now, you can check a weapon. It has to be unloaded, but you can also check ammunition. It has to be in a locked case, but of course you're the one who locked the case, so you could unlock it once you've gotten it out of baggage claim. The thought is, with these gun rules, is you want to keep the firearm out of the hands of somebody on an airplane, and that was why you could have it checked, is because that would be just like transporting it like any other cargo. I don't know that there was thought put into, well, could somebody use it to transport to an airport and then use that as a way to shoot up the airport? If we're hearing that he reloaded. Josh?
We do have you, Chris.
Okay. Just real quick, if we
Chris,
yes.
As you tell us, as you speak, we do now want to offer up an image purported to be the weapon, again, used by the suspect apprehended, 26-year-old Esteban Santiago. As you can see, Chris, here, it does appear to be a handgun that some reports do suggest Santiago took from a bag that had been checked, made his way to a bathroom, loaded that weapon, and then returned to the baggage claim area, opened fire, killing at least 5 and hurting at least 8 more.
So, Josh, that's a semi-automatic handgun, which means the magazine could carry, depending upon if you had a high-capacity magazine or not, 10 to 18 rounds, perhaps. And so we're hearing he reloaded multiple times. So you gives you some sense as to perhaps the number of bullets that were fired. But that is a semi-automatic handgun, which can fire those rounds very quickly. You can pull that trigger back and empty a magazine. That could happen in seconds.
And considering how many bullets that would be in total, it is quite something, perhaps, that only 13 people were struck. Still, tragically, 5 have succumbed to their injuries, and as we did note, 8 more do remain in area hospitals in varying states of recovery. Their conditions unknown at this time. Chris, then, as we had that look then at that gun, we also heard the senator did confirm what we have been reporting as well, that he's been told that Esteban Santiago had been traveling with a piece of military ID, again, on an Air Canada flight. We do not know from where that flight did arrive to Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. But Chris, it is also a question for the time in which we live. What are your sources telling you about any possible connection to a terror group as it regards this attack?
Of course, that's going to be a big question, Josh. What we don't know at this point, what we can tell you and what we learned from this press conference is that the Broward County Sheriff's Office is still leading this investigation. If or when it would become a terrorism investigation, that means the FBI would take it over. That's one of those things that right now they are trying to talk to this suspect and figure out, why did this happen? If it turns out to be terror, you'll see the FBI take over, but they're going to have to go through his computer. They're going to have to try to talk to him. We don't know if he's cooperating with police. They're going to be trying to talk to friends and family to try to figure out why this happened. And until you can rule out terror, you almost have to treat it on some level like that's what happened, because whether or not it was inspired by something else, it's successfully terrorized a lot of people today. So, you can't rule that out until you know definitively. And at this point, we haven't heard that law enforcement has been able to say definitively one way or the other. But, we're only 3 hours into this investigation. One thing that stands out to me here, Josh, is this is a person who opened fire on a crowd of unarmed people, but did not appear to engage police. No law enforcement shots were fired. The suspect was taken into custody without injury.
What would that suggest to you? Again, as you mentioned, and as we did hear from the update from authorities some 20 minutes ago, to that point, that no shots were fired at the suspect, and that by all accounts, he did unload those 3 magazines, anywhere from 30 to 50 bullets in total, but then lay down his gun, sat down, and allowed himself to be apprehended.
It sounds to me like he shot at a bunch of unarmed people and then chose not to engage the people that have the guns and the body armor. This is somebody who wasn't looking for suicide by cop, wasn't looking to go out in a gun battle with police. That's certainly different than what we saw in the Orlando nightclub shooting, where you had somebody who was prepared to fight to the last.
And again, that was a shooting recently invoked by Florida Senator Bill Nelson, who joined us just moments ago. Again, we are now showing you some video of the scene just moments following the attack. If you listen closely, of course, you can hear the torment of those witnesses on hand, and certainly, as you can see here, those attending to victims on the ground, which we have blurred. I do want to reset as we also show you this still shot by a passenger in Terminal 2 out of a window and down at what appears to be a victim here with a significant loss of blood being attended to by at least one person. And we've also now seen this image purported to be the weapon used by the shooter. It is, as Chris did mention, a semi-automatic handgun. It is said that 3 magazines were loaded and fired. Again, that could mean anywhere from 30 perhaps to as many as 50 or more bullets being fired. To reset the scene then, just over 3 hours ago, at just before 1 p.m. Eastern time, there was a shooting in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. 5 at least were killed in the shooting, have succumbed to injuries. Another 8 have been taken to area hospitals injured in that attack. As the airport and certainly that terminal was cleared, it appeared as though things were, again, returning to a relative state of normal. When chaos flared again, we did see the evacuation of another terminal some time ago. Hundreds still remain on the tarmac. Scores more, as you can see here, are being escorted around the outer perimeter, many with their hands raised. And so, Chris Van Cleve there in Washington, at this point, we did hear the head of the airport in question say that all activity has been suspended at the airport, and that now the somewhat thorough, if not painstaking, process of an airport that you've referred to as being a very large one will now be cleared foot by foot.
Yeah, they're going to go parking space by parking space, gate by gate, turnstile by turnstile until they have cleared that airport. Josh, one thing we can report now, we are hearing that the suspect apparently boarded an Air Canada flight in Alaska. It then connected at another city in Canada and then continued on to Fort Lauderdale. We're working on trying to figure out the path, and there are 4 cities in Canada that Air Canada serves Fort Lauderdale from, so we're working on trying to figure that out. But our latest reporting is that he started his day in Alaska, made his way to Florida, through Canada on an Air Canada flight. We're going to continue to dig into that and have that for you by the CBS Evening News, we hope. But Josh, back to you.
All right, Chris Van Cleve again joining us. As we do welcome those perhaps just joining us, it is a CBS News special report that you arrived to, and we have seen a horrific scene play out this afternoon as just over 3 hours ago, a gunman opened fire in a baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, reports suggesting that the gunman in question was an Air Canada passenger arriving to that terminal. Police have taken into custody a suspect they believe to be the shooter. He is 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, born in New Jersey, taken into custody in possession of a form of military identification, said to have begun his day in Alaska, traveling through Canada and then on to Fort Lauderdale. There are reports that suggest he was traveling with a handgun in his checked luggage with a concealed weapon permit to do so. He claimed the bag, loaded the handgun. Again, this is a purported image that you're seeing of it here. Claimed the bag, made his way to a bathroom in that baggage claim area, loaded the gun, returned to that area and opened fire again, killing 5, injuring 8 more. Those 8 are in various states of recovery at area hospitals. Their specific conditions unknown. We have, though, seen the chaos, mayhem really unfold throughout the afternoon as scores of law enforcement personnel from the Broward Sheriff's Office, local police authorities, and FBI make their way to the airport and begin to canvass it. We did see the brief evacuation of a parking garage in between 2 other terminals at that airport, as people in and around that area were asked to shelter in place as there was a report of an active shooter and unconfirmed reports of more shots fired on airport property. We have since heard from authorities that those reports, did not turn out to be so. And now we take a live look at the scene outside these terminals. And again, those law enforcement personnel are some of the hundreds that have now obviously converged upon and shut down the airport proper. We have seen hundreds remain on the tarmac, again, now just over 3 hours after the shooting initially took place. We can tell you that Esteban Santiago, the suspect taken into custody, is said to have unloaded 3 magazines. That would be anywhere from 30 perhaps to 50 or more bullets in the attack. He then is said to have laid the gun at his feet, sat down, and so allowed authorities to take him into custody. We do not know the level of cooperation they are receiving. We have been told, however, that the FBI is now taking the lead on all interviews, both of the suspect and eyewitnesses. We do now want to bring back, again, our Chris Van Cleve in Washington. And Chris, again, what is the state of the investigation right now?
Well, the investigation is going to be moving on multiple fronts right now. So you have what's going on at the airport, which is a mix of gathering your crime scene evidence, your forensics, whatever evidence you need to get from the baggage claim area and wherever else those shots were fired. You also have your heavily armed tactical teams that are in the process of clearing the airport. There are multiple terminals at Florida's airport, at the Fort Lauderdale airport. There are numerous parking garages, and there are thousands of cars in those parking garages. You're going to have to go through the parking garages one by one, floor by floor. Same thing with the airports. You're going to have to clear all of that to make sure there is no other unsafe situation. So those 2 things are going on at the airport. You also have investigators trying to talk to the suspect, find out why he did what he did, find out if there are any links to terrorism, find out if there are other motives. You're going to want to get to his house, wherever he lives. You're going to be trying to talk to his family and friends. So you have a lot of phases going on. You're very early in this investigation, so you're in the more questions than answers phase, if you will. What we don't know is if the suspect is cooperating. We know he wasn't hurt, so police should be able to speak to him. What we don't know is if he is speaking back to them. And if he's cooperating, they may get some of this information very quickly. If he's not, it could take a couple of days before you have all the information you need to look at to start to paint this picture of what happened. We know from covering how many of these mass shootings now, Josh, that in the hours and the days to come, we're going to get a much clearer picture of this suspect and perhaps why he did what he did. But right now you are in the process of just rapidly trying to run down as much information as you can. And that has now shifted from the focus of making sure there isn't a second shooter. It seems like now police are pretty comfortable with that this was a lone act. That wasn't the case even an hour ago.
And CBS News has just confirmed, in fact, that according to the person who provided that image of the weapon purported to have been used by the suspect in question, that the entire incident, the attack there in the baggage claim area, took some 45 seconds. And when you consider again that there are reports that the suspect unloaded a magazine he had initially put inside that weapon and then emptied it and again reloaded twice more, 45 seconds of the random targeting, according to reports we are receiving, of those clustered in the baggage claim area. On one hand, Chris, obviously to have been there must have felt like the most horrific of eternities, and yet 45 seconds, we, if nothing else, can appreciate certainly all that can be done in seemingly a rather short amount of time.
45 seconds and the lives of 5 people and wounded another 8 and terrorized the thousands of people at that airport. A lot happened in that 45 seconds, Josh.
And certainly these are questions authorities have asked after the terrorist attack in Brussels in, of course, late March, early April again, rather, of 2016 of last year, again following a terrorist attack at the airport in Istanbul. Chris, we have begun to take a look at soft targets. It was something that Senator Bill Nelson of Florida spoke with us about just moments ago. And it seems a question we have asked and asked and asked, and yet a question seemingly without answer. How far can you push a security perimeter, keeping the terminals in question and the passengers that fill them safe while still applying security stringent enough to satisfy the new reality in which we live?
Well, Josh, you can compare U.S. airport security to what you see in Israel. And at that airport, it took me, I was there in December, it took me over an hour to get through the security checkpoint from when I started talking to the people to when they cleared my bags. If you're going to check every American passenger for an hour at a time, you simply couldn't travel in the volume that we travel today. And if you were going to screen every single person that sets foot in every single airport every day, we're going to have to either, you're going to see a lot fewer, you're not going to be able to handle the volume of passengers today. So how do you handle the millions and millions of people that are flying on a regular basis and increase security? Wherever you push that perimeter back, you're going to have a gathering of people. And the more concentrated that gathering of people is, and really the bigger the soft target it is, right? I mean, if you decide we're going to screen every car coming into the airport, typically there are 1 or 2 ways into an airport. You're going to create a huge backlog, a line of people waiting to be screened in 1 or 2 concentrated places. So the theory law enforcement has worked under is we're going to take this layered approach where we are going to increase steadily the security as you get closer to the secured areas. And remember, the focus traditionally has always been on preventing terrorists or explosives from getting on board an airplane. We're now having to shift our focus to also include protecting people in the airport from a lone wolf style attack, where the focus isn't so much bringing down an airplane or crashing an airplane or hijacking an airplane, but just on creating terror and mass casualties. So how do you do that while you allow the flow of people? And that continues to be a question that law enforcement doesn't have a perfect solution to. They believe the layered approach works pretty well. I mean, this incident went on for 45 seconds. It was over very quickly. Police presumably were there very quickly. In other incidents, other attacks at airports, other shootings at airports, we've seen law enforcement there within seconds.
And of course, that is now a question to be asked. As you just mentioned, those were questions largely being asked about how to best secure departure halls. And again, those arriving to airports, preparing to travel, and obviously how to protect the terminals and certainly the planes that those passengers would be getting on. Of course, now this again did happen in a baggage claim area, but also, Chris, another question that will be asked, and I do want to mention to those perhaps just joining us, information provided by a Broward County Commissioner, Chip LaMarca, an update that he did provide saying that the shooter was a passenger on an Air Canada flight with a checked gun. He claimed his bag, took the gun from the baggage, and again, we do have an image purported to be the gun in question, a semi-automatic handgun. The suspect, who has been later ID'd as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, went into a bathroom, loaded that gun, and came out and began firing randomly at those gathered in that baggage claim area. Again, this is legal to do, but certainly there will be additional questions asked about the viability of allowing anyone to fly with a weapon.
Absolutely. It's going to be a question they're going to have to look at. You also have to balance, people do travel to hunt, and there will be people that say I should be allowed to check and secure a weapon. Maybe the issue is that ammunition can't be involved. I mean, but it is something that TSA is going to have to look at now. There's certainly going to be a push from people to do that. We are seeing a statement coming into us here from the Anchorage Police Department that is saying essentially that they understand that the suspect that's been identified here, 26-year-old Esteban Santiago Ruiz, that may be a resident of Anchorage, Alaska, and that the Anchorage police are now working with the Joint Terrorism Task Force as part of this investigation. And that would make sense because we were hearing he traveled from Alaska, perhaps through Canada, down to Fort Lauderdale today. So this investigation, Josh, you asked a few minutes ago about the layers of this investigation. You now have a layer of this unfolding on the complete other side of the continent in Alaska, as local and federal authorities are starting to dig into this suspect's background and his day today.
Chris Van Cleve, again, joining us from Washington. Chris, I do want to now direct you to the monitor that I know that you're watching, as we've received now a series of still photographs provided by the gentleman who, in fact, also provided a picture of that handgun that we saw. This in the immediate aftermath, as you can see there, police tape surrounding the area, and obviously personnel they're inspecting. If nothing else, Chris, as we do look at these images, this is, and you've mentioned this already, this is not a small airport. That is, that baggage claim area is certainly sizable, and even if the gunman had opened fire simply on his fellow passengers from his one flight, obviously at peak, there could have been hundreds upon hundreds of people in that hall.
That's absolutely true. Look, it's a Friday afternoon. This is the time of the year when people go to Florida, so it's going to be busy. You also have cruise traffic coming into the Fort Lauderdale area for people who are going to go on cruises that typically leave on Saturdays. So this would have been a busy day. There should have been, if you had flights coming in, lots of people in that baggage claim area. You're talking 100 to 160 people typically on a single aisle airliner. So there could very easily have been hundreds and hundreds of people in there who are easy targets. There's no protection. They're not wearing body armor. They don't know it's coming. And suddenly you have somebody firing round after round after round at defenseless people.
Before then, again, dropping the guns, reportedly sitting down and allowing authorities to take him, as it was noted, unharmed. Again, we got our update some time ago, Chris, as to the state of the investigation. Broward sheriffs, again, informing us as to those killed, again, at least 5, another 8 in hospitals. Their varying states of recovery unknown. Specifically at this time, the scene was called fluid and active. We heard from the head of the airport, again, leading the search of the airport proper. And then we did hear from the head of the FBI field office there in Miami, taking the lead on interviews both of the suspect and the eyewitnesses. It certainly speaks to the level of coordination now that we are seeing as this investigation does continue.
Yeah, it is, this is going to take time, Josh. I mean, just from the clearing that amount of space at an airport that could take hours. And that may be that the danger is well past, but it's just what law enforcement feels they have to do. And that's completely separate from the manpower focused on trying to unravel all of this as to why it happened. And, and then there's also going to be a time to spend on lessons learned. But, right now, my guess is they're gathering security video. They want to know minute by minute how this man's day started, began, and ended, and then start going into the motives, the why and hows.
And that we know of the suspect taken into custody, identified as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, again traveling with a form of military ID. Reports do suggest that he was also traveling with a handgun in his checked baggage. He did claim that bag arriving to the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, having begun his day, reports suggest, in Alaska, moving through Canada. Terminal 2 is home not just to Delta, but also Air Canada. And in that baggage claim area, having claimed his bag in which that handgun did sit, made his way to a bathroom, loaded that handgun, and returned to the baggage claim area, and so opened fire. And perhaps for those just joining us as well, Chris, many conflicting reports as to what played out in those 45 harrowing, horrifying seconds in which he did kill at least 5 people and harm 8 others. What do we know? What have your sources been able to confirm as to any possible link to a greater terror plot?
So terrorism is going to be the big question. And you heard Senator Nelson say that, you can't rule it out until you know for sure. And that's sort of where we are right now in this investigation. That is going to be foremost on the minds of the FBI who are helping with this investigation. Right now, we know that the Broward County Sheriff's Office is leading this investigation, which tells us it is not yet a terrorism investigation. That may be that they haven't been able to rule it out. It may be that it's just not terrorism. We know that this wasn't likely going to be a disgruntled worker because we believe he lived in Alaska. We believe he flew into Fort Lauderdale on a flight, and then this shooting happened. So that does start to drop down some of the possibilities. But we so far haven't been able to rule out terrorism. The initial word we were hearing was that law enforcement was leaning away from that, but it is so early in this investigation, and we don't know if the suspect is cooperating with police, that it's impossible to say what his motives are right now based on what we know at 4:17 Eastern Time, just 3 hours after this shooting.
And considering the very specific time in which this has taken place, again, we can tell you that the White House was briefed as to what happened today in Fort Lauderdale, but so was the president-elect, Donald Trump, again, acknowledging that as well, even as he was receiving an intelligence briefing regarding Russian meddling in the November election. Just wanted to actually, Chris Van Cleve, if you could just stay with us then there in Washington. We do actually want to go to our Juliana Goldman on the White House lawn. Again, Juliana, what can you tell us as to what the president has been told and what he has shared with you?
Well, Josh, the president earlier today was briefed by his Homeland Security advisor, Lisa Monaco. Officials here say he's continued to be briefed throughout the day. Typically in these situations, Lisa Monaco is in touch with DOJ officials on the ground and relaying that information back to the president. We don't expect necessarily to hear from the president on this today. Typically, he does not. Typically, he avoids speaking out when there are these kinds of mass shooting incidents in the midst of investigation as it's still unfolding. Officials are saying we don't expect to hear from him, but that can always change. Now, as for President-elect Donald Trump, he is in New York, and he tweeted earlier today that he's monitoring the terrible situation in Florida. He said that he's just spoken with Florida's Governor Rick Scott, and he's sending his thoughts and prayers to everyone, and he's saying stay safe.
Again, Juliana Goldman there on the White House lawn. Juliana, we do thank you, and again ask you to stay with us as I return now to Chris Van Cleve in Washington. Chris, again, we're seeing the series of images provided us, including that purported to be the gun used in this attack at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport some 3.5 hours ago. Chris, if nothing else, with not just the various agencies involved in the initial investigation then, but with also essentially two administrations also to keep abreast of the investigation from this point, as you mentioned, who will then take the lead here? And if that changes, what might that tell you?
Okay, so right now, this is a Broward County Sheriff's Office investigation. That doesn't mean that the FBI and ATF aren't involved. The ATF will be tracing that gun. They're going to find out the history of it, how it was bought, who bought it. Did that gun belong to the suspect? Was it a stolen gun? That whole history, that's going to take about 24 hours. They can do it in a little bit less, but it's a by hand process. They can't just put it into a database. So there's some steps they have to go to trace the gun. The ATF will do that. The FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force, they're going to stay on this until they've ruled out terrorism. So FBI and local authorities in Alaska are going to be going to what's believed to be his home in Anchorage, in the Anchorage area. They're going to run that element down. Here in Florida, that'll be the Broward County Sheriff's Office. So they're going to focus on evidence gathering. The FBI will certainly be present when this suspect is being interrogated. In fact, I believe we heard the sheriff say that the FBI left with the suspect. So expect law enforcement at all levels to be in the loop on this. As they figure out what the motive was and as they figure out how they want to handle this investigation. When it comes to criminal charges, they're going to look at the likelihood there can be federal and state charges here. So you may end up with multiple investigations. Right now, the Broward County Sheriff's Office is lead in Florida, but they're getting support from federal law enforcement probably at every level, not only on the ground there at Fort Lauderdale, but in Alaska, back here in Washington, in West Virginia, where the ATF tracing facility is for that firearm. So, it's a multi-level coordinated investigation right now where, you have people in the same room from federal and state and local law enforcement talking to each other in the command post there in Florida, and then working their people and their contacts to get information, much the same way that we at CBS News would work a story.
Again, an investigation into what exactly happened in what we have learned were some 45 harrowing and horrific seconds that took place in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport when a gunman opened fire, killing at least 5, injuring 8 others at just before 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
Yes.
Today, I do, Chris, want to ask you to stand by as I do now want to bring you an interview conducted by our colleague Anthony Mason earlier today with an eyewitness to the attack.
Mike, tell me where you were and what you heard when the shooting started.
We were on the main level of Terminal 2, right next to Air France and Delta. And like I said, we were sitting by the door. My kids were on the phone, just buying the time. And next thing I hear is popping noise. And somebody says, shots fired, shots fired. I grabbed the kids, ran out of it, and my wife and my father-in-law were sitting outside. I gave the kids to my wife, who passed them to my father-in-law, who went to Terminal 3, away from all this. And then we looked down where a man was bleeding with a woman right next to him, and she was just saying help. And he was bleeding. His face was turning pale. I'm just looking at how much blood he's lost. It's crazy.
Mike, roughly how many shots do you think you heard?
I think it was more than few, more than several. To me, it sounded like 12.
It sounded about 12. And did you see any other victims?
No, I did not. I was on the main level. All this transpired on a lower level, supposedly baggage claim, lower level of Terminal 2.
And what about the suspect in custody, the shooter? Did you see the shooter?
I don't know. I don't know who the shooter is. I don't know how many victims, but I hear there were at least 9 shots, and I hear there are people who are dead.
And in general, was the situation chaotic, Mike, or was it relatively orderly?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. People ran out, but sheriffs and GSA and just security personnel neutralized the situation, got people away. And as I looked down up on the victim bleeding, there was one of the sheriffs who made sure that nobody's coming close to him. And shortly after, I saw fire rescue and a medical professional who came in, and they took the men away.
And that was our colleague Anthony Mason here earlier interviewing an eyewitness to the attack at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport earlier this afternoon. Mike Starobinski, who in fact also provided some of the still images of victims of that attack. As I do welcome my colleague Chris Van Cleve in Washington to further discuss, Chris, not just as we do see an image of the purported handgun used here, the chaos that Mr. Starobinski did discuss, but also as that chaos certainly result in any mass casualty event, you certainly understand how you can see such conflicting reports on one hand, while on the other here, it is also quite remarkable that while the 45 seconds in which this attack is said to have transpired may have felt like an eternity, it is also, if nothing else, perhaps a measure of relief that it did not continue past that 45-second mark.
You know, you're right. If what we're hearing is correct, and this is a person who reloaded a weapon multiple times, you're in an area where there are a lot of people, they are unarmed. So he certainly could have been more tactical, so to speak, and gone person by person, as opposed to just very quickly firing off rounds. Either way, horrifying, and either way, deadly. But it was a relatively short period of intense violence. That said, it was probably the longest 45 seconds anyone there has ever experienced. And you do end up with this sort of like fog of confusion after one of these things. And as you get all these police and all of these first responders in there, some of them have card key access to parts of the airport, some of them don't. And that can lead to confusion in and of itself. You know, suddenly you've got people that maybe have to kick in a door. Well, things banging around can sound a bit like a gunshot from a distance, and that can lead to some of these secondary reports where people think they hear something, and that then only ramps up the response even further.
And we did see, again, one of those, as authorities did confirm that there were later reports of a possible active shooter on the scene well over an hour after the initial attack. It did lead to the sudden evacuation of a parking garage there between two of the terminals, and certainly scores of people who were similarly stricken, as we've seen people here running across the tarmac, others sheltering in place, obviously fearing for their lives. Chris, then as we again heard Mr. Starobinski's account as well of a gunman who was later taken into custody, what is it that the FBI will be looking to ascertain from him right now, as it does also pertain to that which we've also come to learn of Esteban Santiago, the suspect who was arrested and later identified as the shooter, of what we know of Mr. Santiago's day?
Well, I think if the FBI is talking to witnesses, they're going to want to know what they saw. And any little detail can become significant here. I mean, fortunately, you have who you believe your suspect is in custody, so we're not talking about a manhunt situation here. With regard to the FBI and the suspect, you got a lot of questions for this man. Why did you do it? Seems to be the place where they'll start. Trying to figure out the motive. What made this guy decide to get on a flight in Alaska, fly to Fort Lauderdale, and make the baggage claim of Terminal 2 at the Fort Lauderdale Airport the place for this violence? You know, certainly if your goal was to wreak violence in an airport, he could have done that without traveling across the entire length of the United States. So why Fort Lauderdale? Why the shooting at all? And they're going to also be trying to talk to family and friends. They want to get a hold of his computer, see who he's been talking to, see what his internet history looks like. That will help them figure out if he was inspired to act by, radicalized in some way. And those are all questions right now that you're trying to check off on your list. And that's assuming that he's cooperating at all, right? I mean, if he's not saying anything, you can ask all the questions you want. You're not going to get any answers right away.
And again, we should mention that what of which we know about Esteban Santiago, 26 years old, born in New Jersey, said to be traveling with some form of military identification. Again, he was taken into custody, according to authorities, unharmed. In fact, it was said that no shots were fired once his attack had ended. He simply took to the ground, sat down, and allowed himself to be taken into custody. Chris, as you mentioned, of course, it is unknown as to his level of cooperation with authorities now. And so, Chris, then as we look to what is happening here, and these pictures tell quite a story in and of themselves, as hundreds remain out on this tarmac. We heard the situation called officially fluid and active. If nothing else, how long do you think the folks we see now will be waiting?
Well, it could take hours to clear the airport. And once that's done and you've rendered it all safe, then you would start moving these people who are out on the tarmac in sort of the controlled space. You're going to move them back into the terminal and let them file out. You also have the issue of their bags and their belongings may be scattered on airplanes, in baggage holds on them or in the airport. So it's going to be a process. These folks are going to have a very long day ahead of them. We know that the FAA has basically shut down service to Fort Lauderdale Airport, so flights that were inbound to Fort Lauderdale have either diverted to other airports or haven't left the airport where they were departing from. So you are seeing a disruption, not just the tragedy we have seen at the Fort Lauderdale Airport, and I certainly don't want to diminish that in any way, but you're also seeing that the effect of this shooting means that flights across the country are not heading to Fort Lauderdale right now. Flights are not leaving Fort Lauderdale, and those people are certainly going to be waiting until the all clear is given, and then they can be brought back in, and they'll likely be searched. You can see police searching people there. Folks with their hands up, that's part of an effort to make sure there's not another threat there.
And again, as we just saw, as Chris was mentioning, it appeared that they were searching perhaps employees and other airport personnel. Such is the thoroughness being displayed. And the pictures there of travelers, again, huddled outside these terminals, and the stricken faces, again, it is an unspeakable horror. And certainly, as we discuss the aftermath here, Chris, that cannot be understated. The absolute
Josh, we just got some new information from Air Canada. And an Air Canada spokesman is saying that they can confirm that they have no record of such a passenger by that name or checking guns on any flight to Fort Lauderdale. If, in fact, he was a passenger, as was reported by that Broward County City Council member, there's another airline that flew into that airport that would have service from Alaska. We are working on running that down now, but it appears that he may not have been an Air Canada passenger, as that Broward County City Councilman was reporting, because Air Canada is saying they don't have a record of that passenger. They don't have a record of checked guns on their flights to Fort Lauderdale today.
Okay, we should mention again Terminal 2, the terminal where the attack did occur in the baggage claim area, home to both Delta and Air Canada. We should also note very specifically that Chip LaMarca, the Broward County Commissioner to whom Chris refers, did say that shooter was a passenger on a Canadian flight, perhaps, again, as you mentioned, another airline whose flight had originated there in Canada. And we should also note that we are awaiting words and an update from Florida Governor Rick Scott. That is scheduled to begin at 4:45 p.m. Eastern time today, so just over 10 minutes from now, and obviously we'll have those updates for you here, so please do stay with us. Then, Chris, as we were saying then, as it speaks to just the unspeakable horror that has transpired here, you mentioned the impact, perhaps, not just on flights into and out of this airport in particular, perhaps Florida specific airports, but what do we know about the impact now of this event on air travel across the country?
Well, so it's going to be localized to flights that were coming into Fort Lauderdale or flights leaving Fort Lauderdale. Obviously, no flights are leaving Fort Lauderdale, so those flights are canceled or heavily delayed at this point, and you can't get to the airport, so those flights aren't going. Flights that were going to depart other places for Fort Lauderdale, initially that were within 50 miles of the airport, were being allowed to land. Since then, those flights and any other flights in the air would have diverted either to West Palm Beach or to Miami's airport. And then any other flights that were set to depart for Fort Lauderdale were being held on the ground at the airport which they were going to depart from. So if you have a flight from, say, Newark to Fort Lauderdale later today, right now that flight is on hold. And as long as the airport is essentially shut down in one giant crime scene, that flight's not going to go. The good news, for the most part, is that Fort Lauderdale is not a huge connecting airport. It is more of a destination. Southwest does have a lot of flights that come in and out of there, and JetBlue does have some. But for the most part, it's more of a end your destination point than some of the other airports. So the disruptions will be fairly limited to flights going into Fort Lauderdale or flights that we're going to then connect on to the Caribbean and whatnot. But fairly isolated. This would be a much more disruptive to national air traffic if we were talking about Chicago O'Hare Airport, for example. But certainly anyone flying to Fort Lauderdale today is going to feel the impacts.
And you mentioned, Chris, earlier, so again, we saw that series of still photos. If we could see those again, this is a very large baggage claim area, even if it was just one flight in particular whose passengers were targeted. Obviously, this is a hall when at peak capacity could have held hundreds upon hundreds more. And certainly given the time of year, that could certainly have been the case here.
Absolutely. I mean, look, this is the time of year you want to go to Florida. The weather is nice. It's also, we're talking about a Friday, so if there are cruise ships leaving Fort Lauderdale, they are going to leave on, typically leave on Saturdays. And you got all the vacationers who are going down there for a long weekend. So yeah, it could have been very busy. And we know that Fort Lauderdale is kind of a leisure airport. It's not really one that business flyers use a ton. So you do have a lot of vacationers. They'd be getting their bags. And that would be a very terrifying situation. One other impact, Josh, that we're going to see at airports across the country, not just at Fort Lauderdale and Miami, is you're seeing security being increased. We know the New York area airports have raised security. LAX has raised security. Their police chief is going to speak to reporters in about less than a half hour from now from Los Angeles. So we do know that this shooting is having an effect on the security posture at airports across this country now, as they're taking a very rapid look at their unsecured areas. You can't screen everyone coming into baggage claim, but today you may see officers standing in baggage claim.
And again, to reset here, perhaps for those just joining us, an attack today just before 1 Eastern at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. An attack in the baggage claim area of Terminal 2 at the airport in question, home to Delta and Air Canada, where a gunman did open fire, killing at least 5, injuring 8 others whose conditions are unknown at this time, said to be recovering at area hospitals. There are reports that the gunman, in fact, had been traveling with a handgun in his checked luggage, that in fact he had claimed the bag, made his way to a bathroom where he loaded the gun, returning to the baggage claim area, and so opening fire. Absolute and utter chaos did then ensue. The attack in question is said to have taken roughly 45 seconds. Authorities would later take into custody a suspect, 26-year-old Esteban Santiago. He is said to have been taken into custody in possession of a form of military identification. This is an image purported to be the semi-automatic handgun that he is said to have used. In fact, emptying a magazine and twice reloading it. That would have meant perhaps anywhere between 30 to 50, if not more, bullets had been fired. This is an image of just a bit of the carnage. Again, as you can see there, it would appear that this is an image of a victim with a significant loss of blood being attended to. I can tell you this, in fact, did take place immediately outside this baggage claim area where that victim perhaps fled up against that chain link fence that we saw there. On the other side of that was the tarmac that you see here, tarmac that soon filled with hundreds upon hundreds of terrified passengers evacuating, some still stranded on that tarmac as authorities have been moving them with a nod to the time in which we live around the outer perimeter of the airport. Many, as you see here, hands raised. Briefly, we did see a second scene of chaos ensue as a parking garage connecting two terminals saw a sudden and profound influx of law enforcement personnel armed as they made their way through the parking garage in question, responding, we later learned, to reports of an active shooter and unconfirmed reports of shots fired on airport property. These are images of just some of the hundreds of passengers who were quickly evacuated once again and told to shelter in place, take cover, frankly, behind whatever they could, cars and other obstacles, as we take an overhead look then at the airport in question. And right there in the middle of your screen, Terminal 2 is where this attack did take place. We can tell you that Esteban Santiago was later taken into custody unharmed. Authorities did confirm that no shots were fired in taking him into custody, and it is said now that the FBI is leading the interview, not just of the suspect here, but also Chris, again, leading all eyewitness interviews. And if we look then now at the hundreds still stranded on that tarmac, people who you say may be looking at a longer afternoon into evening as they are held there, obviously any little detail can help here just how thorough will law enforcement personnel then be treating these interviews with anyone who may have seen anything?
Well, certainly law enforcement knows what flight this man came in on, if in fact he came in on a flight. And, you know, we're working on narrowing that down too. So you're going to want to find the people on that flight. Those are the people you really want to talk to, and unclear where they were. In theory, if he did get his gun out of a checked bag, well, most of those people have probably deplaned and may have left the airport. So you'll want to get the manifest from the airline and find those people. From there, the people that are on the tarmac out there likely were in the secured area away from where the shooting happened, and were rushed out there because it was a way to lock them down and get them out of the path of a potential active shooter. They're likely going to get questioned, but probably not the same way that a witness who saw the shooting did. The bigger issue is, until you've cleared out and you made sure that everything that's inside those terminals is safe, you don't really have a place to put the people.
Again, Chris Van Cleve with us in Washington as we do await Florida Governor Rick Scott, who is said to be preparing to provide an update. That is going to be happening at any moment. Obviously, we will have that for you here when those remarks do begin. But as it does, as we did look again at those still being held on the tarmac, the hundreds, there are varying degrees of eyewitness, both those in the baggage claim area who may have witnessed the carnage, as well as those who certainly either heard the event take place or certainly saw the result as scores of people flooded from the baggage claim area in question. We want to bring you now an interview that one of those eyewitnesses did provide. Her name is Ava Davis. This is what she saw and heard.
Yes, my daughter's flight left before mine, and she called me while we were on the bus. I was on the bus on my way here to the airport. She called me. She said, "Mom, they're shooting here at the airport. I'm afraid." And she said, everybody's running, so she started screaming. You could hear the screaming. You could hear the screaming and the running, and she said, "Mom, I'm hiding behind something." She told me she was hiding behind. So I told her to just stay there, you know, and her and her girlfriend. And then they told me, say, "We're running outside now," and you could hear all the feet and the screaming. You could hear the gunshots. So
on the phone, you heard the gunshots?
Yeah, I heard the gunshots over the phone. Yeah, and then we finally were able to get into the airport on the bus that I was on. So when we got here, and we had to walk a distance because they wouldn't let the bus come all the way, we got inside, and we were standing at the door, and then we heard shooting again, and I was talking to my daughter. They were on the tarmac, and out there going to get on the plane again, and they started ushering them on the inside. I heard shooting again.
Now you're hearing the shooting in Terminal 1.
Myself, I was in the terminal, and I could hear the shooting, but you couldn't tell which way it was coming from. But then a lot of people started running from that direction, you know, so then we all started running, and we ran out, but you could definitely hear the shooting a second time. Yeah.
What terminal was your daughter in?
Delta. The Delta terminal.
And then, so you run out of Terminal 1.
Yeah.
You run across the street.
And I run across the street and look over the overpass, and I saw the two police officers knock a person down, and you know, was tussling with them and handcuffed them and set them up against the wall. and they were just sitting there waiting on, I guess, someone to come and help them. But they were just sitting right over the overpass.
What do you think about this?
It's scary. This is so scary. I've heard gunshots before just from living in the city, but nothing ever like this. It was horrible.
Certainly an unimaginable scene there. That was Ava Davis on the phone with her daughter having arrived to the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. She was in the Delta Terminal. That would be Terminal 2. Again, the scene of the shooting earlier today, almost 4 hours ago, a shooting which took the lives of at least 5, injured 8 more. And again, as we can confirm, 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, the prime suspect here, is in custody unharmed, though his level of cooperation with authorities is unknown at this time. Chris Van Cleve is with us in Washington. And Chris, as we heard, again, a mother talk of the understandable fear and terror that she experienced as she heard those shots ringing out in the background, speaking to her daughter there in the airport proper. And as we do see those hundreds still remaining on the tarmac, we also know from the head of the airport itself that while all activity is suspended, certainly a search still continues. What exactly is it then that's going on inside those buildings?
Well, some of it is just an abundance of caution. You know, we had that second report of unconfirmed gunshots, potentially, possibly. At that point, you pretty much have to clear the entire airport just to make sure that there isn't a phase 2 of this attack, if you will. You know, and this is complicated because people likely left those terminals in a hurry. So bags are likely going to be left behind, and you've got to make sure there's nothing in those bags. So you're bringing a canine in at the very least to sniff through the bags. And airport terminals are big, and those parking lots are big. You've got thousands of cars potentially parked in those parking lots that you got to at least walk by or run a dog by to make sure they don't hit on anything. And that takes time. Second to that, you are gathering evidence. You have active crime scenes. We know that there was at least one shooting scene in the baggage claim area, so that whole area is going to be a crime scene. And you're gathering the bullet casings, which will give them a sense for how many rounds were fired. You are collecting any other evidence there. You're getting witness statements probably in that area. So you have a lot going on. That goes hand in hand with the clearing of the airport, which is likely just precautionary at this point.
One eyewitness who spoke to our Anthony Mason earlier say, when asked about how many shots may have been fired, that it was more than several. We do, though, have a purported image of the weapon used in this attack. And as you mentioned before, a semi-automatic handgun. Reports suggest, again, via Chip LaMarca, a Broward County commissioner, that gun was loaded and emptied 3 times. What exactly would that mean?
Well, so we're not 100% sure on the type of gun. We know it's a semi-automatic handgun from looking at that picture. So depending upon the make and model, you could have anywhere from 8 to 18 rounds in that gun. Depends on the size of the magazine and all of that. But let's say at a low point, 8 rounds reloaded 3 times, that's 24 rounds being fired. On the higher end, you'd be 50 to 60 rounds. That's a lot of bullets flying, regardless of how many we're talking about, in a relatively short amount of time, in a space with a lot of people who are unarmed and don't have any good cover. This was, this was shooting the defenseless. And for somebody who had military training, which we understand that this man was arrested with a military ID, he certainly was trained and positioned to create an awful lot of harm. Josh, we know that there are 5 dead, 8 wounded. So if he fired 24 rounds, he hit his mark quite often. If he fired more than that, you've got a lot of people who, regardless, are lucky to be alive.
And again, the report suggests that he was flying with a gun in his checked baggage. The baggage the shooter is said to have claimed in that baggage claim area. They said that the shooter removed the gun from the bag, made his way to a bathroom, loaded that gun, and then returned, and so opened fire. Many questions will be asked, Chris. We have been discussing the viability of protecting soft targets, and would it ever be possible, in fact, to fully protect said targets, but also, again, this
Josh,
notion.
we've got a little new information from the Broward County Sheriff's Office.
Please share it.
Part of why we are seeing people being held in place, there's a suspicious bag that they are going to detonate on railroad tracks. And we know the railroad tracks are just off to the side of the airport, and we had seen people being staged there at one point. So this could also be why we've continued to see people stay on the tarmac and not be bussed away, was because as they were searching, they came across a bag that either didn't look right or a dog could have hit on. That doesn't necessarily mean there's an explosive in there, but there was enough concern that they have a suspicious package that they're going to detonate. So they're also, you're going to hear some noise if you're in the area near that airport when they detonate that. But that could also explain why we're seeing so many people still standing on the tarmac or in that hangar over there at the far end of the airport.
We'll also ask the question, as we've discussed soft targets, not just in the aftermath of this attack, Chris, but certainly in the aftermath of the Brussels attack earlier last year and the attack at the Istanbul airport that did follow as well, the viability of protecting departure halls. Certainly now, similar questions perhaps will have to be asked about how to protect the egress from airports, arrival halls, and certainly these baggage claim areas. Also, as we noted, it is legal to do if he had a concealed weapon permit to fly with a gun, but certainly the questions will be asked once again perhaps about the viability of allowing passengers to travel with weapons and ammunition, even if, in fact, those two are kept separate.
And, Josh, here's the other thing to think about. This is a man who bought a plane ticket, apparently, at least if this report continues to play out. Bought a plane ticket, got on a flight in Alaska. That means he went through security in Alaska. That means when people buy a plane ticket, they are vetted before they get to the airport to make sure they're not on watch lists, to make sure they're not on a no-fly list. So this was somebody who presumably didn't meet at least that threshold of concern. Got on a plane, went through security, was screened, got off his flight, likely made a connection. I don't believe there's a nonstop from Anchorage to Fort Lauderdale.
Chris, as you are speaking, I do just want to inform our viewers that you are now getting the first look here at Esteban Santiago. He is, again, the 26-year-old New Jersey native taken into custody in the immediate aftermath of the shooting, believed, again, to be the attacker in question, who killed at least 5, injured 8 more today at the Fort Lauderdale airport. A 26-year-old, as I mentioned, who was taken into custody. Some reports suggesting wearing some sort of dark uniform, was taken as well into custody in possession of a military ID, taken into custody unharmed. Authorities did confirm that no shots were fired in apprehending him. Reports suggested, in fact, that once he had emptied his magazines, twice reloading, in fact, that he simply took to the ground, sat down, and allowed himself to be arrested. Again, first look here at Esteban Santiago. Chris?
Yeah, Josh, we were just saying that this was a guy who was screened. He went through airport security. He was ticketed to get on a plane, which means on some level he was at least vetted against no-fly lists. The idea is protecting people from getting onto keeping terrorists and threats off of airplanes. This is a sort of a reverse approach to what happened here. This was somebody coming potentially off a plane and had carried the gun in his checked luggage, if that's in fact what happened here. But securing those public areas is an ongoing conversation, and it is one without an easy answer. Frankly, if it was easy, law enforcement would have done it by now. In fact, I have had multiple former federal law enforcement officers, law enforcement experts tell me that. Look, if there was an easy way to do this, we'd have done it by now. And there just isn't an easy answer. And it's how much of a delay are people going to be willing to put up with? And what kind of manpower would it take to secure it if you decided to secure it? Because, where's the money going to come from? Where are the people going to come from? And how do you flow the number of passengers through that airport every day if you're screening them in multiple places?
In speaking to your sources, then, is there a belief, a consensus perhaps among them, that enough is being done at present?
The approach has been, and this has been re-evaluated and looked at consistently since 9/11 and certainly since the Brussels attacks, that the best action is layer upon layer of security, very visible security to act as a deterrent. This man knew the police were going to come, and he chose not to engage the police, right? I mean, he fired his weapon at the defenseless, unarmed people in the baggage claim, then apparently put it down and waited for police to arrive. and because he knew they were coming and he knew they'd be there quickly, and for whatever reason opted not to engage the police, instead to shoot unarmed people.
Again, that is Chris Van Cleve in Washington. Chris, please do stay with us as we are looking again at the first look at Esteban Santiago, the suspect taken into custody in the immediate aftermath of this attack at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport at just before 1 p.m. Eastern time today. A 26-year-old New Jersey native taken into custody in possession of a form of military identification, having unloaded 3 magazines of ammunition, killing at least 5, injuring 8 more. The conditions of those 8 currently being treated at area hospitals is unknown at this time, as we do welcome Scott Pelley again here. Scott, obviously you've been watching the aftermath of the carnage that has played out at Fort Lauderdale today. All too familiar in some ways.
Of course it is, Josh. A new piece of information that we're just getting that seems very relevant to what's happening is federal law enforcement sources have told CBS News that a man of this same description, going by this same name, a man believed to have been the suspect, walked into an FBI office in Anchorage, Alaska 2 months ago and said that the federal government was forcing him to watch ISIS videos. Well, apparently the FBI agents at the time were so concerned by all of this that they took him to a mental hospital. We don't know any more about that or what happened to him once he got into the mental hospital, but that is what federal sources are telling us now, that Esteban Santiago has been known to the FBI at least for the last 2 months.
And it is certainly perhaps speaks to the time in which we live. This is the first question that is asked. We had Florida Senator Bill Nelson on earlier today. He invoked, of course, the shooting in his state in Orlando at the Pulse nightclub where 49 people lost their lives. That shooter, of course, invoking the Islamic State. While that attack certainly played out, if nothing else, it certainly lends another layer to the investigation as we take another look at Esteban Santiago, again, who today was said to have been in some sort of uniform, certainly perhaps not the uniform we see here, but again, apprehended in possession of a form of military identification. Scott, as I mentioned, again, another layer now to this investigation, speaking again to the time in which we live.
And again, to underscore and italicize what we were saying about Santiago a moment ago, he was claiming to the FBI that the government was forcing him to watch these ISIS videos. The FBI didn't suspect that he was an ISIS follower, but they were thinking that he might actually be mentally ill, which is why they took him to that mental hospital.
And yet, as we also see today, and we should point out, it is legal to travel with a firearm if you have a concealed weapon permit. You have to travel with it in your checked luggage. You can also travel with ammunition. That has to be in a locked box, also in your checked luggage. But as we ask questions anew about how to best protect soft targets, questions to add now. How do we treat our not just departure halls, but arrival halls, and the viability of allowing anyone to travel with a firearm in this day and age?
Well, you suspect that he might have been able to walk into baggage claim in most any airport with a hidden handgun and not have to fly it in there. In this country of sportsmen, tens of thousands of firearms fly every day in the baggage compartment where they're supposed to be. And so it's difficult to imagine how that might be able to change, and also not at all clear, as you were pointing out, Josh, why he would go to the trouble of flying to a location to open fire in a baggage claim when, of course, he could have probably just walked in there from the street, at least at the baggage claim level.
And again, the difference is in security. There's also the questions of, as we've been speaking with Chris Van Cleve, all too often in the last 12 months, as we look to Brussels and we look to Istanbul, similar attacks such as that, how to protect a queue of people, how to protect people, and how far to push those security perimeters when in fact it will still result in people massing as they did here in this baggage claim area. Reports again that the shooter was shooting randomly at people who were laid bare.
There's also, as you well know, Josh, you've been reporting this all day, another important story breaking today, and that is the federal government's report on the alleged Russian hacking to influence the U.S. election. Donald Trump, the president-elect, was briefed in New York and came out of that and said maybe it wasn't the Russians after all.
Again.
So a very important story, and of course we'll be covering both of these in about an hour and a half on the CBS Evening News.
And so you will be here to lead that. And to repeat, the Broward County Sheriff's Office reporting at least 5 people have been killed, 8 others wounded in a shooting at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport in South Florida. Much more coming ahead on the CBS Evening News in roughly an hour and a half's time.
For news 24 hours a day, go to CBSNews.com.